Out of all the fully automatic weapons, LMGs distinguish themselves as the more utility-focused weapon class, trading mobility and handling for more specialized benefits such as large ammo pools, longer damage range, high material penetration, and several others. These reward a more passive playstyle that involves holding down areas and denying crucial positions. I'd like to further break them down into two distinct subclasses. True LMGs have the superior ammo capacity reaching into the triple digits, but they have the slowest mobility and handling. These weapons are the definition of playing passive. For those who want something a little more flexible, there is the second subclass, the Pseudo-Assault Rifles. These weapons trade ammo capacity for faster mobility and handling while keeping some of the other LMG benefits, effectively functioning as an AR-LMG hybrid. One of these Pseudo-Assault Rifles is the UL736. This is arguably one of the most forgotten weapons in the game. It used to be one of the best LMGs a couple years back, but was unfortunately a victim of power creep. Better options were introduced, pushing this weapon into obscurity. But with the Season 3 update, this weapon might actually be worth using again. So in this video, I shall be speaking in defense of the UL736. But before we get into the stats of the UL736, we should talk about what changed with the weapon. In the Season 3 update this year, the UL received a buff to its damage profile. It has been given a new initial damage phase, dealing 30 damage base up to 16 meters without attachments. Meaning that within this initial damage phase, you can achieve a 3-tap by landing 2 out of your 3 shots to the upper body, instead of requiring all 3. This buff is significant as it addresses the main reason this weapon fell out of the meta, that being the extremely unforgiving 3-tap requirement. Before this change, landing just a single stomach shot will result in a slow 4-tap time to kill. This was way too strict as the stomach area is the easiest region to hit on the body, making it very difficult to utilize its 3-tap potential, especially in closer ranges. Back in 2022 when this gun was first buffed, this wasn't a big deal. Mind you that the other meta weapons at the time killed much slower and had way less range. So even if you didn't 3-tap, it wasn't very far behind. And the fact that it could kill in less than 200 milliseconds was also very unique back then, since not many weapons could do that. This was the reason it was one of the best weapons at the time, even going as far as seeing use in competitive play. But over the years we saw the introduction of weapons that kill just as, if not even faster, while being much more consistent. So what was once a unique selling point of the UL gradually became redundant, slowly making this weapon obsolete. So this buff is very much welcome for bringing it closer to the current weapon standards. With the buff out of the way, we can now talk about the actual weapon itself. Starting off with the lethality, the UL can potentially achieve a super competitive 3-tap time to kill of 194 milliseconds in the first and second damage phases, which extends all the way out to 35 meters. This is very similar to the KN-44's 3-tap time to kill, except the UL is much more consistent. The KN-44 requires you to, at minimum, land 2 shots to the lower arms combined with 1 shot to the upper arms. Landing just a single stomach shot will rob you of that 3-tap potential unless you can land a chest shot in the mix, which basically feels like gambling. The UL within 17.6 meters will have a much easier time, as you can land 1 stomach shot and still 3-tap, allowing you to make better use of its 3-tap potential in more aggressive encounters. Even within the second damage phase, the UL still has a bit of an edge over the KN. Yes, you can no longer land stomach shots within this range, but unlike the KN, upper arm shots won't screw you over. The KN-44 deals less damage to the upper arms, which means that if you get unlucky and land 2 shots to the upper arms without getting a chest shot, you also lose that 3-tap potential. The UL will never encounter this problem as it deals the same amount of damage to the entire upper body. Beyond this range, the UL can 4-tap all the way up to 50 meters as long as you can land 1 upper body shot. It will be quite rare for you to encounter gunfights within this range since your potential 3-tap range already covers most engagements, but it does mean that you'll basically never need more than 4 shots to kill, making it very effective at longer ranges. Speaking of range, the UL has enough accuracy to make use of its impressive range profile. Its recoil is moderate, being very similar to the KN-44 just with a much longer spray, obviously thanks to the larger mag size. The first 7 shots will go up with a slight lean to the right. It will then switch to the left with a noticeably higher kick, for the next 15 shots before going back to the right and settling down again with the lower kick. So it will be in your best interest to kill the enemy within the initial shots. But how about the BSA? Its BSA doesn't look all that special on paper, but the UL does have a hidden advantage that not that many people know about. This requires a bit of explanation, so allow me to give a quick crash course on how ADS spread actually works. There are 4 main components to ADS spread. First, there is initial BSA and max BSA. I'm sure you already know what both of these are. After all, these are the numbers that you've been staring at in the comparison chart ever since you discovered it. There is a common misconception about initial BSA though. This is not your first shot accuracy. It is actually your second shot accuracy. Now this leads me to the third component, your first shot accuracy. Every fully automatic weapon by default has a first shot accuracy value of 0, meaning that there is no spread on the first shot. You can easily test this in the training mode by tap firing at max distance. You can see that every shot lands exactly where your crosshair is. Your shots will only start deviating starting from the second shot onwards. So whenever you start firing your weapon, you go from first shot accuracy to initial BSA to max BSA. But how do we go from this number to this number? Well, that is our final and most important component, the taper. This refers to the number of shots it takes to go from your initial BSA to your max BSA. Every weapon has a different taper value. This is a very overlooked stat since this is not displayed in the comparison chart. In fact, we don't have the values for all the guns in the game due to how tedious it is to test this manually. But in general, LMGs tend to have longer taper values than ARs and SMGs. This is to account for the fact that you'll usually be spraying with these weapons for quite a bit. And the UL just so happens to be an LMG. So even compared to assault rifles that have better BSA on paper, the UL has very similar accuracy just because it keeps that initial BSA for longer. Since we're here, we might as well talk about the other benefits that the UL gets from being an LMG. First off, the UL gets high penetration. This means that it is much better at taking out enemies behind cover compared to assault rifles, since you can shoot through heavy materials and you won't be dealing a pittance of damage through walls, especially if you have FMJ. The UL also has access to full body disable. For those who don't know, disable is a perk that inflicts a harsh movement speed debuff to enemies on hit. On most weapons, this is a pretty weak perk, since it only applies to leg shots, but on certain weapon classes such as LMGs, this applies to the entire body. This makes tracking targets much easier, since they will be moving a lot slower. This comes in especially handy on guns like the UL, which require you to aim higher. It also has a bit of a supportive element, as tagging an enemy even once will make it much easier for your team to finish off. And finally, for the last benefit, the UL features boosted bullet impact, having a value of 1.35. This allows it to screw over the enemy's aim, especially against weapons with poor hit flinch, making it quite difficult to face against in a spray battle and mid to longer ranges. But just like with every other weapon, actually I take it back, most weapons, the UL is not without its drawbacks. The most obvious one is the fact that it is an LMG, which means slow mobility and handling. And now if you compare it to other LMGs, it is actually not that bad. Its ADS time comes at 346 milliseconds while sprinting at just under 6 meters per second and strafing at 2.74 meters per second. These are pretty fast for LMG standards, as the only ones that beat it are the Hades, Brute Mark 9 and Holger 26, although these three pretty much play like assault rifles. The UL on the other hand is just slow enough to discourage aggressive playstyles. This can be somewhat problematic, especially in game modes such as Domination and Hardpoint, where you will be expected to push up and take space. You can't really do that with the UL, since you can't react or reposition fast enough. And being under the pseudo-assault rifle category means that it loses the utility of having a massive mag size. Now, don't get me twisted, 60 rounds is very good for a 3-tap weapon. Its kills per mag is still pretty impressive. But when you compare to other 3-tap LMGs such as the RAL and PKM, it is tiny in comparison. This means that you cannot pre-fire or spray for wallbangs to nearly the same extent. Although to make up for this, its reload time is much faster than these weapons, taking around 1.8 seconds. So the UL plays more like a morbidly obese assault rifle rather than an actual LMG.
Cause you're fat, boy!
Another issue that the UL has is that even with the improved 3-tap consistency, it is still not guaranteed. Requiring 2 upper body shots in the initial damage phase and all 3 in the second is still relatively strict compared to the meta 3-tappers such as the USS-9, HVK-30 and DRH, all of which can 3-tap much more consistently while killing just as, if not even faster than the UL. So while the UL can potentially achieve a 3-tap time to kill of below 200 milliseconds, this does not mean that you can use it aggressively. Think of it as more of a self-defense measure in case you do get caught close. So after all of that, is the UL736 actually worth using now? Well, it depends on your playstyle. You can think of this as the KN-44's gym bro cousin. Both weapons have a very similar concept, main AR type weapons with 3-tap potential. Most main ARs have the detrimental flaw of poor time to kill in closer ranges as a trade-off for their superior long-range performance. In a game where close-range gunfights are a lot more common than long-range ones, this makes them an inferior option. Both the KN and the UL address this by being able to roll for a very competitive 3-tap time to kill while being very strong at long range. I've already talked about the KN-44 in a previous video, so what does the UL have to offer? The UL features better 3-tap consistency, especially within 17 meters, a much larger mag size, and the additional utility of being an LMG. So this includes high penetration, full body disable, and boosted bullet impact, the latter two being especially useful in the context of mid to longer ranges. The trade-off here being the slower mobility and handling. If you like passive assault rifles including the KN-44, the UL is a very strong alternative. But if you're a more aggressive player, this is definitely not the gun for you. Its mobility and handling aren't great, and its 3-tap time to kill while fast is not consistent enough to be relied on in aggressive encounters. There are much better weapons for that. It is also not the best main AR.
There is another.
But that is a video for another day. When it comes to building the UL736, we'll be focusing on improving its mobility while maintaining accuracy. Start with the lightweight silencer barrel for concealment and mobility, 60 round reload for the largest mag size, RTC steady stock to reduce hit flinch, granulated grip tape for better BSA, and either disable for the slow and hits or FMJ for better wallbang capabilities. The RTC 12.4 inch light barrel does look quite tempting since it helps with ADS time, but I don't think it's worth it since you now have to waste either the perk or a BSA attachment for a suppressor. If you want to fully commit to the passive playstyle, use the RTC 25.4 inch extended barrel instead, and drop the grip tape for the tactical suppressor. With this build you get a lot less recoil and a longer 3-tap range, but your mobility and handling are much slower. Personally, I don't really like this build since this is basically a PKM without the 200 round belt, so at that point why not just use a PKM, but this is still an option. And that covers everything there is to know about the UL736. This is, quite possibly, one of the most underrated buffs this season, and I actually found it to be pretty fun to use, especially when I catch someone off guard with that 3-tap potential. But that's just my experience from using the weapon, so how do you feel about the UL736? Do you think you'll be giving it another shot after watching this video? Feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you found the video helpful, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. But until then, I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye bye.